Have you ever looked at the world around you? I mean, really looked. At your daily life, the chair you're sitting on right now, maybe the screen you're looking at, and just found yourself wondering, is this really all there is? Is it as solid, as fixed, as unchanging as it seems? Or is there maybe something else going on, something far more dynamic, perhaps even more fluid, kind of humming beneath the surface? Today, we're diving deep. We're embarking on a really fascinating journey looking into how ancient wisdom traditions, specifically thinking about Buddhism and Zen here, find these astonishing points of alignment with, well, cutting edge modern science. And we're talking about things like quantum physics and even that, pretty audacious simulation theory. All of these ideas seem to be converging, and they profoundly challenge our most basic fundamental assumptions about reality itself. It's quite something. These are concepts pondered for millennia in the East, and now they're finding this surprising echoes, even some empirical backing in the latest scientific discoveries coming out of the West. It's a remarkable synthesis, really.
It absolutely is. And that synthesis, that bridging of worlds, is exactly our mission for this deep dive. The sources we've been digging into today, things like Awakening from the Simulated Dream, which really explores the nature of perceived existence, and also seminal works like Zen and quantum physics that explicitly connect these two fields. Well, they offer this surprisingly unified perspective on reality. They strongly suggest it's far more dynamic, much more responsive, and significantly less fixed than our everyday senses usually lead us to believe. So our goal here is to pull out the core insights from all this rich material, try to connect the dots between these ancient philosophies and the modern scientific theories, and ultimately help you grasp the profound, I think quite practical implications. Implications for how you perceive your world day to day, for your interactions, and maybe even for your own sense of agency within it all.
I have to say, going through this material myself, there were definitely moments where I just had to stop and, well, rethink things quite a bit. It's powerful stuff. So yeah, get ready for maybe a few genuine aha moments, the kind that might just subtly, but fundamentally shift how you look at, well, pretty much everything. Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this. Okay, let's start with a pretty bold claim, almost provocative, that really runs through a lot of our sources. What if reality, the one you experience every day, is actually far more dreamlike than you currently think? And this isn't just some, whimsical new age idea floating around. We're talking about ancient Buddhist and Hindu philosophies that have, for literally millennia, suggested that what we take as undeniably real is, in essence, a kind of sophisticated projection, a construct of the mind. It's an incredibly ancient concept, but its echoes in modern thought feel startlingly relevant, almost contemporary.
They really do. And to properly get our heads around this, we really need to dive into the concept of Maya. Now, that's an ancient Sanskrit term, very prominent in both Buddhist and Hindu philosophies, and it often gets translated simply as illusion. But it's so crucial to understand what Maya isn't. It's not about denying that the world exists in a nihilistic way, saying your chair isn't really there or that nothing ultimately matters. That's actually a very common misunderstanding. Instead, Maya describes how the world appears to us. It appears in a way that kind of obscures its true nature, presenting itself as solid and separate and permanent, when actually its underlying nature is much more fluid, completely interconnected, and inherently impermanent.
Yeah, think of Maya less like a simple lie and more like a deeply ingrained filter, a cognitive and perceptual filter. It's like you're wearing a pair of glasses, right? And they add this subtle tint to everything you see. You perceive the whole world through that tint, and you believe that tint is the natural objective color of things.
Until, that is, you become aware you're wearing the glasses, and you realize you have the option to take them off. Our sources really emphasize that our desires, our attachments, our ingrained habits of thinking, even the very structure of language we use, they all act like these subtle tints. They lead us to perceive this dynamic, interconnected reality as something fragmented, solid, made of independently existing things. For instance, think about our attachment to my job or my identity or my success. We cling to these, right? But that clinging can obscure the fact that these things are inherently impermanent, they're conditional, they depend on countless factors. And when they inevitably change, because all things change, this misperception, this filter of Maya, often leads directly to suffering, to disappointment, to frustration. So the profound insight Maya offers is an invitation. It's an invitation to recognize this mechanism of obscuration, to see beyond the apparent solidity and separateness, and to maybe awaken to the more fluid, interconnected, and responsive nature of existence itself. It suggests our everyday experience, this feeling of a solid, independent reality, is actually quite similar to a waking dream. It's incredibly vivid, totally compelling, seems perfectly real within its own context, but ultimately it's a construct, a mental fabrication, in a way.
That specific idea of reality as a waking dream or a construct, that's where it gets really interesting for me, because our sources highlight how modern physics and even this simulation theory that people talk about more and more are actually maybe inadvertently cashing up to this ancient perspective. It's truly remarkable when you think about it. It's like science, after thousands of years, is sort of arriving at similar conclusions, but using a totally different toolkit, empirical methods, mathematical models, different philosophical assumptions.
Precisely. Now let's unpack some of these modern parallels, because they are quite compelling. First off, just consider the implications of, say, virtual reality and brain-generated perception. I mean, at a really fundamental level, what you perceive as your reality isn't some direct, objective photograph of an external world out there. Your brain is actively constructing it. It takes this constant torrent of raw sensory input, just electrical signal from your eyes, your ears, your skin, and it actively interprets it. It fills in the gaps, resolves ambiguities, and creates this coherent, immersive model of the world around you. Our sources point out this makes it entirely plausible that our reality is, in essence, a highly sophisticated brain-generated perception. It's like an incredibly advanced VR program, but it's running inside the hardware of our own skulls. Think about optical illusions, right? Or how your brain constantly makes predictions about what you're about to see just to speed up processing. It's not just passively reflecting reality, it's actively building your experience of it, moment by moment. Okay, and then there's the even more audacious idea, the widely debated simulation hypothesis. This concept, famously pushed by thinkers like Nick Bostrom, suggests that maybe our entire universe, literally everything we experience, might actually be a super detailed computer simulation, one run by some far more advanced civilization. The argument often hinges on statistics, on probability. If it's even technologically possible for advanced civilizations to arise, and if they're likely to run what are called ancestral simulations, basically simulations of their own past, well then statistically speaking, we are far, far more likely to be living inside one of those countless simulations than in the original single base reality. It's a truly mind-bending idea, but it forces us to question the very fabric of existence. If our reality were a simulation, then everything we experience, the laws of physics, the feeling of consciousness, the coffee cup in your hand, it would all fundamentally be code, information. Our seemingly solid world would just be rendered data, like pixels on a cosmic screen. And both of these modern ideas, the brain as a VR generator, the universe as a potential simulation, they both fundamentally challenge that purely materialistic worldview that's really dominated Western thought for centuries. The traditional view says reality is just physical matter existing independently out there, totally separate from us, just waiting for us to bump into it or look at it. But if our brains are actively constructing our reality, or if we're potentially living inside a simulation, well, that suggests a profound layer of fluidity. A dependence on perception or computation or information, it points towards a more fluid, maybe mind-dependent or information-based structure to existence, rather than just brute, solid physical stuff.
Okay, so this is the big question then, isn't it? If reality is this kind of projection or a waking dream, or maybe even a sophisticated simulation, what does that actually mean for you, for the listener? Does it make your actions less important? Or maybe more important, does it change how you should interact with your daily life, your goals, your relationships? Because I can see how for some people, the idea of a dreamlike reality might feel, well, disempowering, like maybe nothing truly matters in the end.
That's the absolute crucial point, isn't it? And our sources are really clear on this. The implication is profoundly empowering, not disempowering. Whether you frame it using the modern language of computer simulation or the ancient Buddhist concept of samsara, that cycle existence driven by illusion and desire, the core invitation, coming from both ancient wisdom and modern speculation, is essentially the same. Wake up. Now, this wake up isn't about literally smashing through the matrix code or escaping to some other dimension. And it's certainly not a call to nihilism, thinking nothing matters. Instead, it's an awakening to the true nature of your own experience and perception. It's about recognizing that the solidity, the fixedness, the permanence you perceive might actually be a construct, a very convincing one, but a construct nonetheless. It's about seeing beyond that illusion of a solid, fixed, independent reality and starting to understand how your own mind, where you place your attention, and the nature of your relationships fundamentally shape what you perceive and what you experience. So it's really an invitation to recognize the inherent fluidity and malleability of what you call real.
And right there, in that recognition, that's where you can discover a profound sense of agency, of freedom.
Okay, so we've kind of set the stage with this idea of reality as maybe a dream or a simulation, and how ancient wisdom seems to be finding these surprising echoes in modern thought. But what happens when we drill down, like way down to the most fundamental level of existence? This is where quantum physics enters the picture, and it offers some truly astonishing insights that, again, resonate really deeply with these ancient ideas. Our sources tell us quite clearly that in the weird world of quantum physics, observation and relationships don't just reveal reality, they seem to fundamentally shape its very nature. And this isn't just, philosophical hand-waving. This is what the hard science, the experiments suggest is happening at the most microscopic scales.
That's a powerful way to put it, and it really is revolutionary. At the heart of this completely mind-bending phenomenon is what's known as the observer effect. And it's tied to the underlying concept of subatomic particles existing not as definite things, but as waves of possibility. See, at the quantum level, the tiny building blocks of everything, particles like electrons, photons, they don't behave like the solid little billiard balls we imagine from everyday classical physics. Not at all. Instead, before they're observed, they exist in this strange state of potentiality, a wave of possibility, or what physicists call a probability distribution. They are, in a very real sense, potentially everywhere and nowhere specific all at once until something interacts with them. And the classic quintessential example that our sources highlight again and again to show this bizarre behavior is the famous double-slit experiment. It's worth walking through. Imagine you're firing a stream of tiny particles, let's say electrons, one by one, at a barrier that has two narrow parallel slits cut into it. Okay? And behind this barrier, there's a detector screen that registers where each electron lands. Now, if these electrons were just tiny solid balls like little bullets, you'd expect them to go through either slit A or slit B, right? And they'd hit the screen behind, creating two distinct bands directly behind the slits. Simple enough, like firing tiny pebbles through two holes in a fence. But here's where it gets absolutely astonishing, and what completely baffled the pioneers of quantum mechanics, people like Richard Feynman. If you don't try to observe or measure which slit each electron goes through, they behave like waves, like ripples spreading on a pond. Each electron seems to pass through both slits simultaneously, and then these possibilities interfere with each other, creating what's called an interference pattern on the detector screen. Not two bands, but multiple alternating bands of high and low probability. This pattern is the unmistakable signature of waves interfering, not particles hitting specific spots. It's as if each electron somehow explored all possible paths at the same time. Okay, but then the experiment takes this truly bizarre twist. If you simply place a detector at the slits, any kind of detector, even a very gentle one, specifically to find out which slit each electron goes through, boom, everything changes. The wave-like behavior instantly vanishes. The interference pattern collapses. The electrons suddenly behave like well-behaved little particles again, going through just one slit or the other and creating those two simple bands on the screen, just like the pebbles. This demonstrates something incredibly profound. The simple act of observing changes particle behavior. The sources hammer this home. A particle's state is not determined until observed. Before observation, it's this blurry, probabilistic wave of potential. After observation, it snaps into focus as a concrete, definite particle with a specific location. This isn't just some weird side effect. It strongly suggests that observation determines reality at this fundamental quantum level. The very act of looking, of measuring, seems to conjure a definite reality out of a fog of possibilities. And naturally, this leads to an even deeper and much more debated question that our sources definitely touch upon. Does this observation involve consciousness? Is it the mind of the observer that collapses the wave function? Well, some interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the traditional Copenhagen interpretation, tend to focus more on the physical act of measurement itself. The interaction with a macroscopic measuring device is key. That interaction disrupts the quantum state. But other, more speculative theories do entertain the idea that consciousness itself might play a unique fundamental role in collapsing these possibilities into actuality. It has to be said there's absolutely no scientific consensus on the role of consciousness here. It's a very controversial idea. But the undeniable core fact remains. Some form of interaction, some form of observation or measurement is fundamentally altering the nature of what's being observed. It profoundly underscores this idea that the world isn't just out there, objectively existing, completely independent of any interaction or observation.
Right. So just by the simple act of looking at something or measuring it, interacting with it in some way, we might be fundamentally changing its nature. Or maybe even, in a sense, bringing it into definite existence from a state of just pure potential.
That's wild.
Yeah, that's wild. It completely turns our everyday intuition about a fixed external world completely on its head. It really suggests that reality isn't just out there waiting for us to passively perceive it. Our interaction with it seems absolutely integral to its very form, its definition. It almost makes you wonder, half jokingly, if your coffee cup is only really solid when you're actually looking at it.
Haha. Well, maybe not quite like that for macroscopic objects due to constant environmental interactions. But you capture the essence perfectly. That sense of a dynamic, participatory reality, rather than a static, objective one. And this, of course, raises a really important question for you, the listener. If this principle holds true at the very roots of reality, if what we observe or measure at the tiniest scales fundamentally changes what might this mean for your everyday experience, how can this principle, perhaps scaled up or operating in more subtle ways, influence the world you perceive around you, the situations you find yourself in, how you interact with them? It definitely suggests that maybe the perceived solidity of our reality, the fixedness of our circumstances, isn't quite as absolute or unchangeable as we've always been led to assume.
Okay, so quantum physics gives us this picture of reality as not fixed until observed, existing as potential until interaction. Now, let's pivot and explore Zen Buddhism's perspective, because as our sources make incredibly clear, it offers this striking, almost uncanny parallel. It also emphasizes that seeing causes changing, but approaches it from a completely different philosophical angle. And in Zen, this isn't just a nice metaphor. It's understood as a core teaching about the fundamental nature of existence itself.
Absolutely. It's a deep philosophical insight gained through centuries of contemplative practice. Zen Buddhism, especially as it developed in East Asia, really delves into two core concepts that shed brilliant light on this very point. Ku, often translated as emptiness, and Enji, which points to interconnectedness or relationships. And these two concepts aren't separate ideas. They're deeply intertwined. You really need to understand them together to grasp the Zen perspective on reality. Let's start with emptiness, or Ku. Now, this is probably one of the most frequently misunderstood concepts in all of Buddhist philosophy. When people hear emptiness, they often jump to the conclusion that it means nihilism-like. Nothing exists, everything is a void, nothing matters. That couldn't be further from the truth. Ku doesn't mean non-existence. Instead, it points to the blankness of inherent existence. What that means is that no thing, no phenomenon, possesses a fixed, independent, self-sufficient substance or essence that exists all by itself from its own side. Nothing has an unchanging core identity that defines it solely from within, separate from everything else. To make that clear, let's take a simple object, like a piece of paper. Is its essential nature paperness? Or is it really wood pulp, which of course came from a tree? And the tree depended utterly on sunlight, water, soil, air. Its identity as paper is entirely dependent on countless other factors, conditions, and very importantly, our perception and use of it. If you burn the paper, its paperness completely vanishes, doesn't it? It's replaced by ash. And the ash, in turn, is dependent on the fire, the original paper, the oxygen in the air. Ku means that no thing, whether it's a physical object like a chair, or a mental object like a thought, an emotion, or even our own sense of self, possesses a fixed, independent, unchanging essence that exists entirely on its own, isolated. Instead, its meaning, its identity, even its perceived existence fundamentally changes based on perspective and relationships. It's conditional, relational through and through. Our sources offer a really powerful and relatable example of this. This self cannot exist without relationships with others. Think about who you are, your identity, your roles in life. Maybe you're a friend, a parent, a sibling, a professional, your memories, your hopes, your fears. All of that, every aspect of yourself, is fundamentally defined by and through your interactions and relationships. Relationships with other people, certainly, but also with your environment, your culture, your past experiences, your future aspirations. If you could somehow take away all those relationships, sever all those connections, the very notion of the self, as you currently understand it, would start to dissolve. Its meaning, its definition would just dissipate because it is fundamentally empty of some fixed, independent, standalone self-nature. And this applies to absolutely everything. A cup is only a cup because of its relationship to holding liquid, its relationship to sitting on a table, its relationship to a hand that might pick it up. Without those relationships, without that context, it's just, what, a collection of ceramic molecules. Its functional identity, its cupness, vanishes. And this understanding of emptiness leads us directly and naturally to the concept of relationships, or Enji. Enji is like the dynamic expression, the living reality of emptiness. Zen profoundly emphasizes that all things exist through relationships and not in isolation. Nothing, absolutely nothing, exists purely by itself. Everything is deeply interconnected, constantly influencing and being influenced by everything else in a vast, intricate web. Reality, from the Zen perspective, isn't something outside that can be seen, some external static landscape that exists independently and that we just passively observe from a distance. Not at all. Instead, reality is something that arises in the here and now within these very relationships. It's a continuous dynamic unfolding process, a constant co-creation happening right now. The very act of interaction, of relating to something, of perceiving it, actually brings reality into being in that specific form, in that specific moment. There's no fixed backdrop, no predetermined stage waiting for the actors. It's more like a constantly evolving dance of interconnected phenomena. And this is precisely why Zen places such enormous emphasis on direct, immediate present moment experience, because reality isn't found in abstract concepts or past memories or future projections. It's always only arising right here, right now, in your immediate embodied interaction with the world.
Wow. Okay, so if I'm tracking this right, on one side, we have quantum physics telling us that reality at its base isn't fixed until it's observed or interacted with. It exists as this field of possibilities that kind of crystallizes into a definite state only upon interaction. And then on the other side, we have Zen saying, well, there are no inherently fixed things to begin with. Everything is fundamentally empty of independent existence. Everything only arises and exists through relationships, and it's constantly changing, constantly interacting, constantly in flux. It really, really sounds like they're describing incredibly similar things about the fundamental nature of reality, its fluidity, its dynamism, its responsiveness. The observer, the relationships, the act of perception itself, they all seem to be absolutely central active participants in shaping what we experience as real. It's uncanny, the convergence.
It truly is a fascinating convergence, and I think you've articulated the core of it perfectly. What's so compelling, so powerful here is how both of these frameworks, originating from vastly different methods, different cultures, different historical contexts, fundamentally challenge that deeply ingrained common sense notion of an absolutely fixed world. They both strongly suggest that reality is constantly changing and fluid, always in motion. It's not a static photograph, right? Not some completed artwork hanging on a wall. It's much more like an ongoing process, maybe more accurately described as a verb rather than a noun. Both disciplines, using their unique lenses, one empirical, relying on experiments and mathematics, the other philosophical, relying on introspection and direct experience, seem to arrive at this strikingly similar, quite revolutionary conclusion. The world we experience isn't some rigid, predetermined stage set. It's a lively, responsive, profoundly interconnected unfolding happening right now.
Right, so let's try to bring these two incredible threads together now, because the full picture, this grand convergence, it feels really powerful when you see it laid out. We've got quantum physics suggesting reality isn't determined until observed, existing only as potential until an interaction occurs. And we've got Zen Buddhism teaching us that things are fundamentally empty of any fixed independent existence, and that they are constantly changing, constantly arising through relationships right here in the present moment. The alignment, when you put them side by side like this, it's profound. It really is almost poetic. It feels like two entirely different paths leading explorers to discover the same hidden landscape, the same revolutionary insight about the nature of things.
They absolutely do converge in remarkable ways. Let's try to synthesize these core points of convergence, because I think this is where the truly transformative understanding really emerges. Okay, first, regarding reality as emergent and non-fixed. Both frameworks fundamentally dismantle the notion of an absolutely fixed world. They really move us away from that default common sense assumption that reality is just out there, pre-existing, solid, totally independent of us, just waiting for us to passively look at it. In quantum physics, as we saw, particles are waves of possibility. They are explicitly not determined until observed. This means reality at its most fundamental level is not absolutely fixed before interaction. Before any measurement, before any interaction, it exists as this blur of potential, a superposition of states. It's inherently indefinite. Similarly, in Zen, the concept of ku, or emptiness, implies no fixed independent substance. And because things are fundamentally empty of this fixed inherent nature, they possess the capacity to freely change. There's nothing intrinsic holding them rigidly to a single static predetermined form. So both perspectives, coming from opposite ends of the spectrum, seem to agree that reality isn't something prepackaged. It arises within present relationships. It's not discovered like finding a rock. It's born, it emerges, in the very moment of interaction and connection. Okay, second key convergence point, the crucial role of observation and perception. This is just undeniable. It's a central pillar where these two seemingly disparate fields meet head-on. Both perspectives converge on this radical idea that observation or perception plays a crucial role in shaping or determining reality. In quantum physics, again, this isn't just theory. It's demonstrated in the lab. The act of observing changes particle behavior, period. And this directly implies that observation determines reality at that fundamental scale. The very act of looking, of interacting, collapses that waveform of potential into a definite, concrete reality. Zen Buddhism echoes this profoundly, emphasizing that seeing causes changing. You know, one of the voices in our source material puts it beautifully. How you see changes how the world appears. It's not merely what is seen, but the act and the manner of seeing, the lens of your perception, your attention, your interpretation that profoundly influences the appearance and the very experience of reality. Your subjective viewpoint isn't just adding some color to an objective world, it seems to be an active participant in its very manifestation. And third, and this might be the most profound convergence of all, is the idea that reality arises through relationships and interaction. Both Zen and quantum physics seem to align on this understanding that reality arises or comes into being through interaction or relationships in the present moment. It's not some external static given that we just passively observe like watching a movie. Instead, it's something actively constructed, actively experienced through the dynamic interplay of all elements involved. Zen specifically highlights this, stating that all things exist through relationships and not in isolation. It posits that reality itself arises in the here and now within these relationships. Even our very sense of self, as we discussed earlier, cannot exist without relationships with others. It is literally defined by its connections. And quantum physics, through the mechanism of the observer effect, also implicitly suggests that reality emerges from the interaction inherent in observation, thereby necessarily involving a relationship, however subtle, between the observer, or measuring device, and the observed system. It paints a picture of reality as this continuous unfolding dance, a dynamic co-creation between all elements within the universe.
Okay, this is huge because this isn't just abstract philosophy locked away in monasteries or theoretical physics confined to labs with particle accelerators. This has profound, potentially life-changing real-world implications for how you, the listener, actually live your life day to day. Think about it. If reality isn't fixed, if it's constantly arising, and if your own observation, your perception, your relationships fundamentally shape it, well, then you potentially possess far more agency, far more influence over your own experience than you might ever have thought possible. Now, this isn't about magical thinking, right? It's not about being able to literally manifest a new car just by wishing for it or moving mountains with your mind. But it is about understanding that your perception isn't just some passive camera lens viewing a predetermined objective world. It's an active ingredient in the recipe of reality itself.
Exactly. That distinction is crucial. It's not about omnipotent control, but about recognizing influence and participation. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, both Zen and quantum physics seem to teach that the uncertainty, before observation, that space of potential, is precisely where creation and freedom reside. Before something collapses into a fixed reality, when it's still just a wave of possibility, or when its nature is seen as empty potential, that is the space of maximum freedom, maximum malleability. And this insight grants individuals the profound freedom to choose how to see. It means you don't necessarily have to accept a seemingly predetermined reality or a difficult situation or even a limiting self-concept as an absolute unchangeable given. You can actively choose your lens. You can shift your perspective. You can change the nature of your relationship to it. And by doing so, you can influence how that reality manifests for you in your experience. So again, it's not about controlling the external world in some forceful, domineering way. It's more subtle. It's about recognizing and consciously influencing the relationships between you and the world, between different aspects of a situation within which reality itself arises. It's about shifting from being a passive spectator to becoming a conscious participant in the ongoing unfolding of existence.
So it really does seem to boil down to this, doesn't it? Maybe it's less about desperately trying to change what you see out there because the what is constantly in motion anyway. Maybe the real power lies in changing how you see, because that how your perspective, your attention, your relationship, that's what ultimately changes your world, your experience of reality. That feels like a truly empowering, almost liberating idea. It really shifts the focus away from external circumstances that often feel completely beyond our control and puts it squarely onto our internal landscape, our perception, our attitude, our way of interacting, which is something we can actually influence and cultivate. Hashtag outro.
Absolutely. And what we've really explored today, drawing from these diverse sources, strongly suggests that reality isn't some static backdrop, some fixed stage upon which our lives just passively play out. Instead, it seems to be much more like a dynamic, ever-changing dance, a dance of observation, perception, and relationships. From that ancient Buddhist concept of Maya, which helps unveil the dreamlike, constructed nature of our everyday perceptions, to the frankly mind-bending quantum observer effect, which demonstrates how the very act of looking seems to shape subatomic reality. And then finally to Zen Buddhism's profound experiential understanding of emptiness and interconnectedness. The core message, remarkably, seems consistent across thousands of years and vastly different methodologies. Your perception isn't just a passive window onto reality. It appears to be an active participant, maybe even a co-creator, in its continuous moment-by-moment unfolding.
So here's a thought to take with you. The next time you encounter something that you believe to be absolutely fixed, totally solid, completely unchangeable, whether it's a stubborn problem you're facing, maybe a challenging person in your life, perhaps a deeply ingrained idea you hold about yourself, or even just the seemingly solid wall in front of you, just pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what if this isn't quite as solid, quite as fixed, quite as unchangeable as I currently think it is? What if my way of seeing it, the quality of attention I bring to it, or the kind of relationship I choose to cultivate around it, what if that could fundamentally change everything about how it appears, how it feels, or even how it exists for me? How will you choose to see the world differently now, knowing or at least suspecting that it's constantly in motion, constantly arising from potential, and always, in some deep and mysterious way, responsive to your gaze, to your participation? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We really hope you found some truly profound insights, maybe even some practical tools to carry forward into your day.